Howdy, sir.
How you doing?
I am well, and you?
Troubles,
Okay.
mental,
Okay.
it's the health
I knew that's where you were going with
It's
that.
stress related then.
I don't know.
Okay, remind me to lock that gate.
Look at Karen staring down.
Oh, we're still in Genesis?
We are still in Genesis. And we'll get rolling tonight as we are still in Genesis. We're almost done. Next up will be Exodus. I was kind of charting out Exodus a little bit late this afternoon, and we'll have a little bit of Bible reading plan, much like what we're doing right now, where Monday and Tuesday will lead us into our Wednesday night class. And so that should be done, finalized here in the next week or so. We'll have to be, because in like 2 weeks we're going to be in Exodus, which is another fun story, another book maybe that some of us have gone over before. We know the stories, we're pretty familiar with. But at this point in Genesis, where we are tonight, and Genesis 42, no human character, and that's important, no human character consistently and perfectly exhibits noble character. Like at almost every step of the way, every main human character has a fall scene. Adam and Eve there in the garden, Noah in his garden, Abraham lies, Isaac lies, Jacob has his whole journey. And now we're looking at Joseph, and even Joseph, there's some things in Joseph's story that kind of indicate that maybe he wasn't always a delight to be around, especially if you were one of his siblings. But all these heroes, all these people in Genesis to this point, even though they have flaws, they have and exhibit tremendous faith. They suffer, yes, but they also are blessed. And so last week we kind of saw Genesis 37 through 41 and kind of introduced ourselves to Joseph's story, and we started seeing the fractured family and all these family problems and a father's favoritism and the consequences of that favoritism. And now we're seeing almost kind of the reversal of that, or the start of the reversal of all those problems. And the question that kind of comes to my mind is, the people and the names are the same, but are the people changing? And I think what we're going to see as Joseph's story continues is, yes, they do. And so here in Genesis 42, and that's when. There we go. Oh, that's why.
We have plenty to talk about from 37.
We can. We could always go back and talk about last week, because I think I had to rush through the end of last week. But we are going to continue into Genesis 42, because with some of these stories and some of these texts, like, you can spend weeks on this. Just to kind of to Kevin, what Kevin was saying, like, if you ever go to like seminary and take like graduate Bible classes, like, you can take an entire 16-week class, 3 hours a week on the book of Genesis. Like this, that's how rich some of these books are. And so here in Genesis 42, as we kind of near the end, or get to kind of the middle part of Joseph's story, how does Joseph interact with his brothers here in Genesis 42? And what stands out to you? Like, remember the background? How Joseph's brothers were jealous, and so they sold him off into slavery. Over time, he's exalted to number 2 in Egypt. And now we're starting to see them come back together. So how does this interaction go down there in Genesis 42? And what kind of stands out to you? What jumps out to you in Genesis 42?
It jumps out to me that it immediately says that he immediately remembers the dreams he had, that we were introduced to, that seemed to be the start of all of this.
Yeah. Things are kind of coming back. Those dreams that he had all the way back, and I think it's Genesis 37, are popping up again. What else do you guys notice there? those dreams are coming true. Well, I mean, what were those dreams about there in Genesis 37?
Joseph doesn't seem to jump in and say, "Hey, brothers, let's get together. Remember me?" I mean,
Yeah.
he reacts kind of distance, and there seems to be something else in his mind
Yeah.
that he wants to.
And that's the puzzling thing when you look at Joseph's story, right? That when you look at his story, like for most of us, if we were meeting our siblings for the first time in 20 years, we're hugging them immediately, we're crying, we're like, let's go grab coffee, Starbucks is just down the street. Joseph is kind of standoffish.
I don't think that's surprising though.
But I think there's a reason for that. I think he's going to do some things, and we're going to see why.
I mean, the dude was in a pit.
Yeah, like,
You know, they were debating, they were debating how to kill him, and one of the brothers, you know, at least stepped up and said, look, man, let's just sell him instead.
yeah.
You know,
let's-
so I mean, you know, I don't care if that's 5, 10, 20 years later, there's probably a little bit of a grudge that you might have with them because they haven't shown themselves to be anything but that. So I think that anybody, him being cautious, if I'm looking at it from his angle,
yeah.
is I think the fact that being second in charge in Egypt, I mean there'd be a if he were an evil man, you'd just take him and have him killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it stands out to me in verse 19 and says, if you are honest again.
Yeah.
And so I think that speaks to where his mind is at. And I think it's really logical to me that he doesn't know where they stand now.
Yeah.
And I think that it does speak well of Joseph at this point that he doesn't immediately write them off. He could have taken vengeance on them right now.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, he tests them.
Yeah.
And I think that this is all part of, like, he is enacting this sort of elaborate plot to test them.
Sort of elaborate is one way to put it, Kevin. Yeah. But I think you guys are both right. Chris is right. There's some generational trauma, if I can use that term here. I mean, just put ourselves in Joseph's shoes, that if our siblings threw us in a pit and then turned around and sold us into slavery, and 20 years later we had the chance to meet them, would we be a little standoffish? Yeah. And as Kevin and Chris have both pointed out, Joseph is second in command. He has a lot of power. If he wanted to kill them, he could do it and no one would bat an eye.
Well, this whole section, 37 into 42 and beyond, it reads like a limited series from a Netflix show because it goes back and forth, right? You've got two different, you've got same family, but two different things going on with a certainty of them meeting at some point. And this is sort of where that comes together. They've spent the last 20 years doing their own thing and having their own problems and their own issues and their own successes, and now a global event has precipitated this reunion.
There's a famine, and so everybody goes to Egypt because Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. That's the global event Chris is talking about. And so Joseph's brothers come down there. They're down there to get food. And Joseph is, like we've said before, second in command, and he sees his brothers, he recognizes his brothers, they bow down to him, but they don't recognize him. And a lot of times I think we see this, and the way I've heard people say, well, how do you not recognize your brother? If you haven't seen somebody in 20 years, would you recognize them? A lot of aging goes on between the time you're 17 and the time you're 40. Like if you look at, I wish I had a picture of 17-year-old Austin, so you could see the aging going on. You look a little different. We were back home for Christmas, I think it was, just a few weeks ago, and a girl who was like 8 when we moved away comes up to me and starts, "Hey, Mr. Austin," and I'm like, I've been gone for 8 years, and she looked completely different because the girl that I remember her as is this tall. She's this tall and driving her car into mailboxes, quite literally. And so people change, and even so much so that when you're not expecting to see someone. In a specific context, especially.
Well, remember, there's 10 of them coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so you got this crew coming up versus one who they think is in slavery for sure,
Yeah.
probably dead by this time.
Yeah.
So they're contextually, they're not even
Yeah.
thinking, oh, well, of course he's gonna be the guy in charge.
Yeah, like you've sold him into slavery. Like you're thinking to what Chris is reading my mind there. You're thinking when you're going down there, if he's alive, he's somewhere low man on the totem pole. You're not expecting to see your brother as number 2 Egypt.
I also think there's a big like, we're not thinking about the cultural difference of
Right.
how Egyptians dress and
Yeah.
like their makeup and
Makeup. And you.
manners and everything. Like,
Yeah, and so there's all these things like going on, and so they don't recognize him, but he sees them. And so you guys are bringing out some like great points on maybe why Joseph does recognize. All great point. Anyways, they go through the series. You're spies several times in the text. You're spies. There's the test. Kevin brought up the testing, and it's this really, really elaborate series of tests that Joseph puts them through over the next couple of chapters, and that's being done because he wants to see, have they changed? They sold me with hate into slavery. Have these guys changed at all?
and I think that's like, to me, this is, you asked like what stands out, and these kind of aside conversations the brothers have are
Yeah.
really interesting to me, and I feel like are really key
Yeah.
to us understanding the message that God is communicating. And it's really it's really fascinating to me, the conversation, because it's so relatable,
Yeah.
but also because of the insight it gives to Joseph to what's going on in their
Yeah.
heads. And so it's interesting that Joseph at the beginning of this passage, excuse me, Joseph remembers the dreams.
Yeah.
So he's thinking back about like, oh, the dream was just like, this is a prophecy that just came true. His brothers now immediately think back to when they sold him.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that both parties, even though they brothers don't know that it's Joseph, are also thinking back to this similar moment in time.
Yeah.
And the brothers as a whole seem to be like showing some remorse here.
Yeah.
It's not the same
Yeah.
as like them apologizing, but they're showing some regret. Like,
Yeah.
like we shouldn't have done that. And
Yeah.
so Joseph's hearing that.
Yeah.
It's really key to me that it notes that Reuben steps in, and Reuben, he doesn't show remorse, he shows, I told you so.
Yeah.
He's separating, distancing himself from the situation as though this wasn't my idea, I didn't have a participate in this. And I think that's really key as we go on.
Let's read that conversation there in verse 21, because I think Kevin is right that verse 21 and 22 and 23 of chapter 42 kind of set the foundation, I think, in Joseph's mind for the next couple of chapters, that maybe, just maybe, this relationship is reconcilable, which is why I think the series of tests come out there in the text. That then they said to each other, obviously we are being punished for what we did to our brother. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not. This is key for these 3 verses. Listen. This is why trouble has come to us. But Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. That's the second time we've seen that. Now we must account for his blood. Then they did not understand, or not realize that Joseph understood. That's the third time. It's the same idea, same word there in the Hebrew. Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them.
ESV uses a reckoning.
Reckoning, yeah. Like, where does he use reckoning?
Reckoning for the blood.
Reckoning, there we go. An account, a reckoning for their blood. And so this guilt that they've been carrying perhaps for 20 years for how they treated their brother, and then how their dad responded, has been weighing on them, and they're now realizing, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, karma bites. It hurts. It's coming back to get them. And so and all the while they're talking in Hebrew, and they're thinking, well, we're talking in Hebrew. This dude is an Egyptian. He's not going to recognize us. He's not going to understand us. Joseph's sitting in the background going, yeah, I understand everything you say. So he puts these series of tests in motion to see how much his brothers have changed. And this is what's kind of so interesting in this story, character development in Joseph, that he goes from this bratty kind of teenager that we read about in Genesis 37 to a brother who's got all the power in the world and is kind of toying with them to see if maybe, just maybe, they've changed, and starts to see maybe there is hope for this relationship. Another really quick thing that stands out to me there in verse 7 is that when Joseph first meets him, the text, my translation says he spoke harshly. And for me, that kind of, and that initial interaction kind of goes back to Genesis 37. That they didn't treat Joseph like a brother. They spoke harshly about him. They treated him like a stranger. They treated him like an enemy. And now Joseph, when this relationship gets moving, the reconciliation gets moving, Joseph speaks harshly to them. He speaks to them more like an enemy. And in fact, accuses them of being an enemy, accuses them of being a spy. So there's all these kind of plays and kind of connections back and forth in this story there. But these rough words are part of the redemptive work to bring these parties, bring these brothers back together. And so the brothers go home. They realize there's silver in the bag because Joseph is doing that test that we've talked about.
Okay, I
Yeah.
want to just interject real quick.
Yeah.
Again, going back to this big picture of like we're following these different genealogies,
Yeah.
like who's the promise coming through. And I know last week we kind of talked about like, well, Reuben did the thing with Jacob's concubine,
Yeah.
so we think he's on the outs. Simeon and Levi
Yeah.
slaughtered a city, so we think they're on the outs. Judah went all crazy off on his own,
Yeah.
so we think he's on in the outs. We're going through all that, but I think like understanding this kind of the social hierarchy of the brothers is really important as we're going through this. And so for Joseph to pick Simeon, like, is like a targeted move, and I think that was probably already something that was unnerving to them. Like,
Yeah.
he didn't pick the firstborn. I don't know if that's because he didn't want to, chop off the head of, or if because he already knew that Reuben was on the out, so he's taking out the second,
Yeah.
the second in line. I don't know what that exactly the reasoning was, but it was obviously overtly targeted.
Mhm.
And I think like as readers, we need to be like really picking up on
Yeah.
this I'm now just blanked out, but like who's in line, like the order of brotherhood, like I guess, and like
Yeah.
who's gonna get the prize,
Yeah.
and how are they behaving in all of these scenarios that come up, because we're seeing their behavior of the top 4 and the bottom mostly 2, but
Yeah.
mostly Joseph, and like I feel like all of this is just really key. Sorry,
Yeah.
I kind of
No,
spaced out.
No, well, you're spot on, and we're going to see the brothers' relationship and how they kind of interact in that hierarchy that they use the word you use really come to light in chapter 43, especially. Reuben has his "I told you so" there in 42:22. Reuben tells his father there in verse 37 when they get back and they tell a story and kind of replay things there in chapter 42 in the second half of the chapter. And Jacob's like, you're going to make me childless. Joseph is already gone. Simeon is gone, as Kevin has pointed out. He's back in Egypt. Now you have to take Benjamin back. That's the only way you're going to get food. Everything happens to me. That's hilarious to think about when you consider the scope of Jacob's life. And then Reuben speaks up and says, you can kill my 2 sons. Like, again, Genesis doesn't tell us the tone in which they say things. We're kind of left to kind of read into that ourselves. But that seems really casual to me. How quickly he's willing to offer up his two sons. I have a couple more thoughts there, but I see Chris's hand and then Kevin.
Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I doubt it was casual. Like, I mean, it wouldn't have been meaningful if it was casual.
Yeah.
But, and I think culturally, it was probably not unreasonable
Yeah.
to show his commitment.
Yeah.
What it reminds me of, though, is we have the same reaction that we have to Lot giving his two daughters to the
Yeah.
mom. And I think that that's intentional here. And I think we see that behavior by Lot, and I think you could justify it culturally.
Yeah.
But I also think that none of us would think that that was a great choice by
Yeah.
God's eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that here, and because we know what's coming, but like Reuben's behavior is kind of a mimic of what Lot did. And
Mhm.
was it culturally sensible? Yes. But is it what God wanted? Is it the type of sacrifice that God's looking for? We're gonna see no, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's not the sort of it's not what sways Joseph or sways Jacob.
Yeah, and that you're kind of with the last sentence there. I think you're really getting at the heart of it. And there's some things I have to say there in 37, but I don't want to. Chris, what's going on in your mind?
God's not, at this point, God's not narrating morality. He's going to do that in Exodus with his people. Right now, his purpose and Moses' purpose of doing this to the people was God's going to keep his promise to
Mhm.
the generations.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And so as we look at the construct of human nature that takes over with there's things that we might do differently, there's things that might offend us now. God's not endorsing
Yeah.
the pathway, but he's telling this story for us to understand that his provision for the generations, the promise that he made all the way back to Abraham and reiterated to Israel
Yeah.
is going to be seen. In fact, even that promise is still another 400 years away. But this is part of that provision, part of what they needed to do to make that promise happen.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to know that what we're seeing here, tying Chris's and Kevin's comment together, is this is not God endorsing what Reuben said. It's just telling the story and telling us what Reuben did. And I think Kevin brings up a great point there. Yeah, we read it. We can read it with a casual tone, but Reuben may be reflecting the culture of that day, much like some of his actions earlier in his story did when he slept with his father's concubine in an attempt to take preeminence in the family, to stake his role as the next big family patriarch. And so what Reuben's doing here seems on the surface culturally the right thing to do. But it's not. And so I want us to kind of consider as the story goes on, what actually convinces Jacob to send more sons or the sons back to the story. And so really quickly, as we look at Jacob responding to the events as they are unfolding before his eyes involving his sons in 42 and 43, how does he respond? Another tragedy has struck his family. One son, he thinks, is already dead. One son is in Egypt. And now he has to send the other son of his favorite wife down there to get more food in the middle of a famine. How does he react to all these things?
I'm not going to risk Benjamin to save Simeon.
Yeah, like, does that tell you about what he's learning from the problem? What caused Joseph to die? His favoritism. Everybody knows. Yeah, Joseph may have been a little bit of a brat.
Well, I would say what caused him to die is his brother's jealousy.
Yeah, but why are they jealous? Why are they jealous? The favoritism. So I don't. And maybe the point is, it's not. It's probably both. They were jealous because of the favoritism. You take away the favoritism, maybe they're not jealous. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. He uses this term about being bereaved, and he uses it a couple of different times. And I think at this point, he's like, I give up.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, you know what,
Yeah.
I've lost Joseph, I've lost another one, now it's gonna be Benjamin, I just, you know
Yeah.
what, I just throw my hands up.
I have 12 sons. 3 are scumbags, you know, Simeon, Levi, and Reuben, to paraphrase, if I can kind of reference back to earlier stories. 3 are going to be dead, Joseph, Simeon, and Benjamin. You know, that's what he says, you know, bereaved. Everything happens to me. He's like, why? But I wonder how much of this is maybe even character development for Jacob. Think about where he started in his story, the manipulative person, maybe, just maybe, some of those seeds that he sowed earlier in his life, maybe coming back to haunt him a little bit here as the story develops. Yeah, Kevin.
Amanda just pointed out, that, and I think a really good point, that, again, not to try to make it, that's not saying that it's the right behavior,
Yeah.
but to understand Jacob, like, Benjamin, like, Jacob didn't want to marry Leah,
Yeah.
like, he was trapped, like,
Yeah.
tricked into that. His children from Rachel, he lost Joseph. So,
Yeah.
and Rachel's dead now.
Yeah.
So the last piece he has of the wife that he loved, that he worked so long
Yeah.
to be with, is Benjamin.
Yeah.
And so there is a sense where I think, hopefully as humans, we can relate to treasuring Benjamin that extra amount.
Yeah.
And again, like, I don't want to try to say, like, that makes it okay, but I do think, like, we should try to understand these people so that we can understand how we
Yeah.
can find ourselves in the same circumstances
Yeah.
throughout our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, well, to go on that, Moses, through inspiration, he's showing actions, but he's giving us a little bit of Jacob's inside voice, like in his head voice. And I think we've got to determine that, because we all have thoughts and things that maybe we correct ourselves later, but we think them, right?
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily say them, we don't necessarily voice them, but they may be there. We're getting some insider information here, and some of the statements, like I'm bereaved, you know, he's definitely disappointed. But the thing is, there's also every indication that over the last 20 years, he's still been dedicated to those sons.
Yeah.
So we're seeing one little snapshot of a moment of high stress inflection, not a pattern in terms of his overall care for his son. And we all
Yeah.
care for, every one of our kids is different. We
Yeah.
care for them differently. It's just the nature of
Yeah.
kids. And so, you know, and you give him, hopefully you give him what he needs. Now, has he got some problems? Yeah, sure, he got some problems
Yeah.
too. But that's just the nature of it. I just think sometimes we try to read too much into this and go, oh, that Jacob, or oh,
Yeah.
that, or, you know, if you just wasn't so selfish, like, yeah,
Yeah.
because we're not selfish,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And we don't have our favorite kids.
Yeah. I don't.
You trying to throw me out?
She doesn't, and she doesn't either.
I'll tell some stories when we're not recorded.
For me, his stories.
But yeah, I'll tell some funny non-biblical stories that are completely irrelevant to the point we're trying to make tonight in class. But and so the situation gets so bad here in 43 that okay, they're running out of food. Whatever food they took back with them from Egypt in 42, they're running low. And it gets so bad that Jacob's like, we've got to go back. And he's like, well, we've got to take Benjamin. And Jacob's resisting. And Judah finally speaks up. And this is so interesting, especially how the story continues there in the text. So Judah steps up, send the boy with me. We will be on our way so that we will live and not die, neither we nor you, our dependents. I will be responsible. I will be guilty, verse 9. It must be so. Here you go. Go. And so they took the money and the gifts and they go back to Egypt, trip number 2, and they come back. And Joseph sees Benjamin, and there's this meal. And at this meal, Joseph gives portions 5 times larger to his only full brother, full biological brother. And then he issues another test. There in the text, there in verse 44. And just real quickly, there in verse 32, it talks about, Jacob washing his face and regaining his composure there in verse 31. Then he served him by himself, his brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who were eating with them by themselves, because Egyptians don't eat with Hebrews, since it's detestable to them. This actually kind of helps us a little bit date the book of Genesis, at least the life of Jacob, or Joseph, for a couple of reasons. One, it tells us that a native Egyptian was, or we can infer, it doesn't directly tell us, we can infer from this that Egyptians don't eat with Hebrews, that a native Egyptian was on the throne. And here's why that's important. Sometime around 17 or 1800 BC, maybe a little later, maybe a little earlier, but that's a rough date. The Hyksos, Hyksos, came and took over and conquered Egypt and ruled Egypt. And the Hyksos were a Semitic people. They were somehow closely related, connected to the wider Semitic people, which would include the Hebrews and the Israelites. And so it tells us that if Egyptians don't eat with foreigners, that it tells us the native Egyptians on the throne. So this is probably before the Hyksos take over. So it's before 1800 or so. And that'll also help us date Exodus when we open up the book of Exodus here in a moment. There in a text. So it just kind of helps us a little bit there. I think that's a little interesting as we try to kind of understand when it is that it's about 1800, probably closer to 1900 BC when this is going on, which means, for those of you keeping track at home, the pyramids are built. So potentially some of these guys are seeing the pyramids that we would see in Giza, if they stopped in that area. So there in chapter 44, 43, they're having this meal with Joseph. Joseph piles on 5 times more, and that is going back to what Kevin said a moment ago, a test. I think. A test to see, okay, they got mad when Daddy played favorites with me. Let's see if they get mad when I play favorites with Benjamin. Let's see what happens. And so that kind of leads me to this question: what changes do we see in Judah between Genesis 37 and Genesis 44? What changes? Like, what do we see in Judah's character and his character development over the last 7 or 8 chapters? Think about the Judah we saw there 8 chapters ago. Who was he?
The number one thing, it's not explicit to the text, but it has to be inferred, is that sometime after they sold Joseph, he went off on his own.
Yeah.
Went all crazy.
Yeah.
And now he's back with the family.
Yeah.
So that's number one to me, is apparently he had needed to spread his own wings for whatever reason. Kind of seems understandable considering this such a family situation. Don't blame him. But went off on his own. But things went really bad. But now he's back, and he's showing concern for the family group as a whole, is what I'm seeing here. It's not about himself. He's concerned about providing for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the huge contrast that we just saw from Reuben is Reuben offers his 2 sons up as collateral, but Judah, now we know that Judah already lost 2 sons, didn't want to risk his 3rd, then has a son with Tamar, so he still has 2 sons probably at least. But he doesn't offer them up, he offers himself up. And for me, it's hard to not see some Christ typology there. When he says, do it so that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. He'll be the pledge for their safety. And then he tells them, if I do not bring him back and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever. So he's not just taking on a single generation of blame or like a single moment of blame. This is for all time type of thing. So it's really hard to not see that some sort of tie-in to Christ coming up. Obviously Christ does it better, but
I'm glad you're seeing the Christ typology. I want to go back to something you said a moment ago, Kevin, because you see, we talked about this some a week ago, but I think it's important for this question. That Joseph and Judah, in two side-by-side chapters, that Genesis 37 and 38, both go down away from their family and have two kids. Judah is reconciled. And so what Judah is going to do, Judah at some point afterwards is reconciled to his family with all his mistakes and all his failures and all his shortcomings that we see there in Genesis 38. And now, as Kevin's rightfully pointed out, Judah offers himself as a substitute. And that decision, that sacrifice, if I can use that term, is going to play a role in helping reconcile Joseph with his family. And Kevin's spot on there in terms of the Christ typology there, that Judah offers himself as a substitute to save Benjamin. Later down the road, some 1800 or so years later, 1900 or so years later, another son of Judah offers himself as a substitute. What other changes do we see in Judah? Judah, there in chapter 37, verse 26, as they're thinking and debating what in the world to do with Joseph, what do we gain if we kill him? Let's sell him. What can we do? How can we profit off our brother? Now he's sacrificing himself for his brother. Judah develops into a little bit of a leader over these 7-8 chapters. Again, not claiming to say he's perfect and not saying we claim that he's completely moral, but there are definite similarities between some of the traits we see in Judah, offering himself in place of a brother, playing a role in reconciling brothers, that we see in his son 1900 years later. Y'all see any other parallels or character development or changes there in the life of Judah? So Judah makes this plea. He goes for Benjamin. When they get back, and of course, as the first half of 44 talks about, that this cup is with Benjamin and Judah. That means Benjamin's going to have to go down in prison, and Judah's like, no, I'm the one going. You're not taking Benjamin. I'm going in his place. And then that leads us to chapter 45. Because at this point, there in chapter 45, Joseph could no longer keep his composure. Let's debate this question. When Joseph reveals himself in Genesis 45, what stands out to you? Joseph has toyed with them a little bit. He's tested them a little bit. They've gone back and forth a couple of times. And now it's time for the big reveal. What stands out to you about Joseph and when he reveals himself to his brothers?
Can I back up a little
Yeah.
bit? Sorry, I was falling too slowly behind you. Going back to Judah, so he has several points in this whole testing, like going back to remembering that Joseph is still testing them
Yeah.
to see, and I think Joseph is trying to figure out, have they changed?
Yeah.
Joseph knows he's changed since,
Yeah.
and I think it's very gracious of him to consider that his brothers may have changed. And he kind of gets a mixed bag when he first sees them. Like, he sees some remorse from them, but then Reuben is kind of like, I told you so. He's not really willing to take any sort of blame. And after that experience, like, I just see Judah really, and after Reuben tries to sell Jacob on the two sons thing, that doesn't work, and I just see Judah really, he doesn't wait for it to go, well, Simeon's not there, but he doesn't wait for Levi, he doesn't wait for Reuben, like, he sees the problem and he goes,
Mm-hmm.
tries to solve it. And in contrast to when they first arrived, and they're kind of talking amongst themselves saying, oh, this is karma for what we did to Joseph earlier, Judah just, and Pharaoh Joseph is still, in his eyes, a stranger. He just straight up says, like, I know why this is happening, and it's because of God, and it's because how we, what we did in the past. And he expresses such care and concern about what they did to their father previously. And that is really fascinating to me, because, like, he is showing a lot more selflessness. He's thinking beyond, like, he's concerned about what this will do to Jacob,
Mm-hmm.
not what it's going to do to him, or that he's going to end up in prison or anything. And I just think that's really, like, also amazing to me to see such a huge transformation from somebody. To be, when the chapter with him and Tamar be like one of the weirdest, most disgusting chapters in the Bible, to
Yeah.
this person who's like, he's literally putting his life on the line because he doesn't want his father, who's played favorites with other brothers and not him,
Yeah.
but he's now willing to sacrifice his life
Yeah.
for him. And for his younger brother, who is the favorite,
Yeah.
that they betrayed. Like, they betrayed the favorite brother previously, he can betray the favorite brother again, and also betray his father, and he doesn't this time.
Yeah.
And owns up to that mistake from the past.
And that kind of goes back 2 questions ago in that development, that he goes from a very selfish guy there in Genesis 38 in his sin with Tamar, taking advantage of Tamar and failing to really kind of having to really be pushed to do his due diligence to live up to that commitment, to a very selfless guy. Not only willingness to give himself as a substitute for his brother, but as Kevin's pointed out, his concern for his father. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the word father appears 14 times in verses 18 through 34. Like 16 verses, I think the number is 14 times Judah talks about his father. This is a guy who is selflessly thinking about his brother and his father's love for his brother, who, as Kevin has rightfully pointed out, is the favorite son that is still alive. And yet he says, I'll die, I'll stay, I'll make sure he gets back. Even though I'm not the favorite son. I'm going to make sure the favorite son gets back. Like Judah has learned a lot. And Joseph, as he's hearing this, and that leads us there into chapter 45, that's when he realizes, okay, people change. So when he reveals himself, what stands out to you there in chapter 45? Yeah.
You've probably already covered this because I'm here late.
Yep.
But to me, here, I just hear echoes of Esther all over the place. I think Joseph is now realizing that everything that happened because it happened just how God wanted it to happen, that he was brought to this moment for just such a moment as this.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at people breaking down the biblical theology, the technical term of this, of the story of Joseph, Daniel and Esther are two of the other characters people love to go to. The people who rose to power, who were Jews for such a time as this. There's some parallels there. There are a lot of parallels there that Esther we could probably unpack. Yeah, Kevin.
Is it okay if I have a few more comments?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, one of them was Amanda's idea.
I saw her lean over, so we know this is the
Colin.
brains of the family.
Calling back to the beginning of Genesis starts with, you know, brothers against brother and
Mhm.
asking, am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah.
And now you're at the scenario again where it's brother against brother, and you know they weren't literally posed the question, but they at the beginning were kind of got that, you know, that was the underlying theme. Am I Joseph's keeper? And they're like, no, Joseph's on his own. Versus now Judah's taking full responsibility for all of the brothers, for the whole family, and looking out for them.
Can I pause right
Yeah.
there just to tie some? Think about what he just said in the context of Genesis real quick. Cain and Abel. A brother sins against a brother and is sent away from the family. Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael sins against Isaac and is sent away from the family. Jacob and Esau, another brother and brother sin. And as a result of sin, a brother has to go away. Now there's a brother against brother sin, but it's one of the brothers who's working to reconcile it.
Two more. The one was just calling out more Christ typology.
Yeah.
I did, there's
It's
a
all
ton of
yeah.
typology from Judah, and I know we didn't highlight it, haven't been highlighting it, but like all of Joseph, like there's just huge amounts of typology.
We're going to talk about that's going to be the
Okay.
last question at the end of next week.
Okay, but this dinner in particular is just like loaded with parallels to the Lord's Supper, which I think is so fascinating
Yeah.
and so many lessons to draw from,
Yeah.
like highlighting just what's similar and what's different. And so then the third thing was just going back again to Judah's concern for his father and comparing that then to thinking ahead to Christ. And I think sometimes, from a worldly perspective especially, we interpret God's commands to us and talk about him being a father as though like he is forcing us or trying to strong arm us into doing these things. And the example we get from Jesus is that, yes, he acknowledged the Father's authority, but Jesus was doing it because he loved his Father. And I think that that is so wonderfully illustrated in Genesis with Judah now in this narrative here in chapter 44, where he talks about his father. And I think it's just so compelling to me to see how selfish he was and to see this now change. Even though his father, in this case, is still the same person that caused so much of their pain and suffering before, that caused a lot of that friction that occurred with Joseph, that's still causing some of it. But instead, Judah is still just more concerned about his love for his father. And like, it's such a compelling story to me. I guess.
Yeah. There's a lot here. I think my plan is to make the last question next week. Okay, what parallels to the story of Christ? Because as Kevin just mentioned, there are a truckload of parallels between Joseph and Christ that I want us to unpack and think about. So spoiler alert, expect that to be one of the questions for next week. And so here Joseph reveals himself. For 20 years or so, he's been in Egypt. For 20 years, they have been separated. He's been testing them. He's been toying with them. He's got enough information that they have changed that he sends everybody out except for his brothers, and he begins to weep loudly. And in verse 3, he says to his brothers, I am Joseph. If you're one of the 11 in the room, are you shaking in your boots? Like, you know what you did 20 years earlier.
Well, Judah just literally confessed to them.
Yeah, like, you know what you did. You know what you said. Like, you know everything that happened. You're looking at the dude who quite literally has the power of life and death in his hands. And he's the brother you sold into slavery. You are shaking into your boots. He's in your boots, and he says, is my father still living? But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Yeah. Understatement of the century. He says, please come near. And they came near. I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. Yeah, I haven't forgotten what you did. But don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because, and this is something that's going to pop up, I think it's 3 times here in the next couple of verses. Because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there'll be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. And therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. 3rd time. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of the entire household, and ruler over the entire, or all the land of Egypt. He recognizes this. He reveals himself to his brothers. He does not reveal himself in anger. He recognizes that, as Steve just pointed a moment ago, that God's hand is in all of this. That God sent him ahead to preserve a remnant. Like 2 or 3 times there in the text, you see redemption language. Verse 5, to preserve life. Verse 7, to establish you as a remnant, to keep you alive. Twice there in verse 7. He recognizes that he is playing a role in God's redemptive work. He says, go back and get Dad. Bring him here. And I want to settle you in the land of Goshen. For those of us, if I'm remembering the maps correctly, from where Goshen is. Goshen, y'all know what Egypt looks like? Y'all remember from like geography in elementary school? Egypt has the Nile Delta in the north. Goshen is the Nile Delta area. And that's going to do a couple of things for the people, and it's going to play a critical role in the 400 years we don't know much about. It's going to give Israel their own land where they can form their own identity, where they can become their own people. Where they are now, there in Canaan, they're surrounded by Canaanites, influenced by the Canaanites. We saw that with Judah in his life last week. Kevin's brought it up this week. And this will allow them to go there. It will give them some of the best land in Egypt for shepherding. And so this is turning out not just to be providential and the saving their lives physically, but also a place for them to become their own people and really flourish, and to borrow the language from Exodus 1, be fruitful and multiply. The perfect situation for them. And so Joseph there in verse 14 and verse 15 throws his arms around his brother. He weeps with his brothers. He kisses his brothers. And they talked with him. That's interesting. Because in Genesis chapter 37, when the story began and the conflict began, his brothers couldn't say a word because of their hatred and their jealousy. Genesis 37, verse 4. And now, these brothers are reconciled. And they can talk as brothers. What else do you guys see there all the way to the end of chapter 45? What else jumps out to you guys? Any final words, final thoughts, final comments, questions, concerns? Okay, guys, we are going to finish up the book of Genesis next week. As I mentioned a moment ago, one of the questions is probably going to be parallels between Christ. So start thinking about that over the last 3 classes. So 2 weeks ago tonight, and then what you see over the next week in your reading. And just thinking how Joseph anticipates or looks forward to or connects to the story of Christ. That will be one of the questions we talk about next week. But on that note,